destruction of Hamas. However, according to an interview by the IDF spokesman, Hamas is an idea which cannot be defeated militarily. So who is right? Can Hamas be defeated, and how?
Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 258 of the war in Israel. Today we're focusing on this question, can Hamas be destroyed? And this comes from an interview with Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, who's the spokesman and one of the highest ranking of the IDF. In this interview, Admiral Hagari said something like, the politicians say we have to destroy Hamas, but how do we destroy Hamas if they are an ideology? And then he goes out, and we'll discuss later on, but he goes making a few points about the destruction of Hamas itself. So is this just a misunderstanding, perhaps, between politicians and military, or is that based on lack of principles or difference in values? How do you see Hamas and the possibility of destroying it?
Because this has caused some ructions within with Netanyahu and within the media in covering this. However, that's not really our focus today. Our focus is less on that and any difficulties within the Israeli political chiefs, etc. But it's more on this idea of how do you defeat Hamas? Because you can't just do it as a military governing body. It does have to be as an ideology. And what this guy says, this IDF spokesman says, is that making Hamas disappear is like throwing sand in the eyes of the public. And you cannot simply defeat the Rafah brigade, being one of the last brigades in Rafah, which they claim that they're close to doing, and say it's over, it's done, Hamas is defeated. Militarily wiping them out for their capability will not solve the problem, because tomorrow, who will govern Gaza, and will it be Hamas in it with a different name but the same ideology behind it, namely Islamism and the ideology of Islamic theocracy, that combination of Islam and politics, which makes such a hideous country of Iran, for example, and will be behind every caliphate that is sought by these people.
The Netanyahu, the prime minister's line of destroy Hamas, it actually comes with a caveat. He's a politician, so you can imagine. It comes with a caveat that destroy Hamas for him means destroying the military and government capability of Hamas, i.e. putting the Hamas group in a situation when they cannot set up a new government, or they cannot get hold perhaps of money, and they cannot do another October 7. However, as Richard pointed out, Hamas is not just a thing that happened in the air and happen. It's like a disease. You catch Hamas. Hamas is actually integrated in the population, because Hamas comes from an ideology, Islamist ideology, fueled by the most radical version of Islam, which we all know is geared up to the destruction of Jews. Jews is an obsession in the Quran. A destruction of Jews and the infidel is what people hang on to, what they go to when they want to shortcut the martyrdom and achieve the ultimate death that they seem to be so keen on. So this attempt to just cause a physical destruction of Hamas, yes, you might well get rid of the last brigade left in Rafah, but after that, what should you do?
And within this article, within this interview, Hagari has said, Hamas is an idea rooted in the hearts of the people. And I think that gets to the crux of it there, because it's not just that this is what people believe in, this is what they think, but this is, comes from the heart. This is their emotional attachment, their religious attachment. That we've seen from the recent polls, for example, how much support Hamas has within Gaza, even more so within the West Bank, and that is substantial. It's well up there in the 60% within Gaza, and even higher, closer to 80 or so in the West Bank. So it's clear that ideology is in both heart and mind, because people think with their heads, but they also have an emotional attachment to what they think. And that is it, what he's hinting at here.
In 2005, when excuse me, when Israel handed over the land, which is now the Gaza Strip, to the Arabs, what did they do? The first thing they did was to elect Hamas. Hamas had a struggle with the Palestinian Authority where they killed each other for a bit, but then eventually, having been the victors, they set up a government, they went to election, and they won the election. I.e., the people in Gaza voted for them. And even now, even despite the bombing, despite the IDF sending leaflets explaining the situation, and after 20 odd years of struggle, the people in Gaza still support Hamas. As Richard said, the poll shows the support of Hamas, which is waning slightly, but we're talking about within the marginal error of the poll itself. So you could argue it's unchanged. And this is a very good indication. I mean, this was a poll done by a Palestinian authority set in the West, a Palestinian entity set in the West Bank. So it's some Westerner that went there and decided to come up with numbers. So if you don't believe these numbers, well, yeah, I'm sorry. But the support for Hamas is still there. And again, you can get rid of the Hamas boss, but there's going to be another boss in the waiting unless you change their hearts and minds. I mean, we made the examples a number of times about the Japanese turnaround after the Second World War. Japan was similarly ideologically really, really entrenched. And the United States had to drop 2 nuclear bombs in order to break that kind of morale of the people. Unfortunately, you had to kill lots of civilians in the process, but that's inevitable in a war. So that prompted the government to surrender, unconditional surrender, and the Americans set up effectively a government, write the constitution for them, give them the government that would then set Japan on the road of westernization, civilization. And now, nobody would argue that the Japanese are not some of our best allies. And coming from the place where they were during the war it's extraordinary. Now, you could argue that the Gaza's the Islamist component is a bit more radical and hard to wipe out, if anything else, because we're talking billions of people, and it's not just localized around Israel as such. For example, the evil Islamic Republic of Iran is providing endless support and troops and weapons and whatever. So that's going to be a different issue. But for Gaza in the short term, the defense secretary Gallant, for example, is having a bit of a spat with the prime minister, because he doesn't want an Israeli presence in Gaza, which is probably a massive mistake, because if right now you seize government to the Arabs, they will set up another Hamas. It's inevitable. If you don't change the thinking behind it, the ideology, the philosophy, what motivates their actions, it soon is going to turn back into a Hamas state, perhaps with a different name, but the results will be the same.
Yeah. I mean, what Gallant is saying is you need to find a replacement for Hamas, or it'll regroup and reform itself in some way. And of course it will, because, it has a legion of people who've been indoctrinated from a very young age. Each of those young kids, as they get 1 year older, are given more weapons than they were the year before, and more training at the summer camps, etc., that we've seen lots of footage of, and indoctrinated in the UNRWA schools and taught to hate Jews even more. And all of that, there's always a supply that will replace those who are removed, whether they're currently in the military or in the political field. And of course, the ideology remains behind it. I think one of the shows that we've done on this channel was presented by or appeared on it was Tal Safani, and he laid out some really good steps for the future after the end of the war. Essentially, he was talking about a ladder of freedom, how you need to lay out the steps for the Gazans, because as Marco's example there with the Japanese, it took many years for that to take place. It's not an overnight thing. You can't simply say, okay, war's over, off you go, chaps. We want you to find someone new and we'll trust you that they are different. That is not going to work. It's not going to work as a rebrand with a different name and a different headscarf and a different color. None of that's going to work. It needs a lot of oversight. It can't just be a case of handing it over to someone new, or doing it with even worse outside bodies, whether they're the UN, whether they're coalitions with other Arab countries, or international bodies who have half a mind to support the ideologies that you're trying to defeat here. So it's necessary for the Gazan people to realize themselves what the ideology is that they need to renounce, and of course to implement it under the guidance and under the careful oversight of the Israelis for as long as is necessary to ensure the safety of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, both Netanyahu and Hagari are right, because you have to destroy them, Hamas, militarily, making sure that the structure is no longer in place for anyone to attempt to regroup in the short term, and that's fair enough. But again, even if you destroy the infrastructure, you don't destroy the ideas, you don't destroy the people who crave martyrdom because their religion says that is a value. Talk about the opposite of Western civilization. Anyone who says that Islam values are compatible with Western one is a big, massive liar, or is a total idiot. Because you just have to learn from the experience of Afghanistan, for example. We were in there for 20 years. We didn't impose Western culture. We didn't impose Western value. We didn't teach that freedom, individual freedom, is actually what motivates people to live a prosperous life, what allows people to live a prosperous life. And it took what, a week, a month after the bodge withdrawal that Biden overseed, and it all went back to the Taliban. And all the apologists and the arse lickers in the West who said, oh, but this time the Taliban, I have learned after 20 years, they're so much better. Look at the freedom of women. How long did it last? I'd like to hear those people again apologizing and admitting they're totally wrong. But no, they're still out there talking, and this time is supporting Hamas against Israel. So some people never learn. And if you want to learn something else from the West, just look at the massive, utter failure of multiculturalism. The utter failure in every single Western state, which allowed people to settle and keep their costumes and never integrate, never realize that even primitive culture needs to be moved up and civilized and given proper value. Here in Britain, we still have Somali communities still performing female genital mutilation. We have Asian communities practicing slavery. So much so that in 2019, Theresa May, the Prime Minister, he imposed some legislation called modern slavery. Modern slavery means not native British, imported slavery. But we cannot say that because that breaches the stupid tenets of multiculturalism, which is a total failure. So just learn from the mistakes of the past, the very recent past, and try and implement those in Gaza. But you have to have the confidence that your values, your civilization is much superior to the one of the medieval savages that committed October 11, and just go for it.
And the other important point here is that actions have consequences. Those consequences for Gaza for October the 7th are being felt at the moment as they should be. They're not being felt sufficiently, we would argue, but nevertheless, that they're being felt to some extent. And of course, the rewards out of this afterwards, the reconstruction of Gaza, how it's rebuilt, how commerce and those kind of things are restarted again, those need to be done on a steady process. And of course, actions, you shouldn't have the wrong kind of reward. The reward should be worthy of the action. So you shouldn't be rewarding people for murdering Jews for the terrorism of October the 7th. Now, I just wanted to thank a couple of our super chatters. Thank you, Jonathan Honig, for $3.99. Thank you. Appreciate it. And also to Bonnie Bertrand for yours. Thank you, Bonnie. And I think some people in the chat are clearly concerned that that the IDF spokesman has spoken out of turn, if you like, or trod on Netanyahu's turf, but by commenting on this kind of stuff. But I think one of the things that's important here is that he's trying to do two things really. I think trying to plan ahead and make sure that there is sufficient planning. I mean, from a military point of view, you need readiness and preparedness for the future in any situation, and not thinking beyond the end of the war is what caused all sorts of problems in the Middle East with Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's necessary to really plan ahead. And in order to plan ahead, you need to be realistic and you need to face up to reality. And there is a big question mark as to whether the government is being entirely clear in what defeating Hamas means. Because if it doesn't mean defeating the ideology behind it, the Islamism behind it, then it isn't defeating Hamas. It is simply achieving a temporary respite while it recovers, while it rebuilds, while it trains up new soldiers and new militants, new terrorists, and before it commits another October the 7th, as it's promised to do. And whether that's in a charter, as it is with Hamas, to try and wipe Israel off the map, and destroy Jews, or whether it comes through the idea of returning, in quotes, Palestinians from across the world, and essentially swamping Israel with a different ideology to the one that it was set up to be, which is as a free, independent state where Jews could be safe. So all of that is necessary. So he's doing that on the one hand. He's talking about the preparedness and the future planning. But also, I think he's pushing back on the idea that it's just a military setting, that it's just a military solution, because there is quite a lot of well, I mean, let's look at what Netanyahu said as an example. A quote from him was, "We have a state with an army, not an army with a state," which is basically telling this IDF spokesman to get back in his box. And that he decides as the leader of the country, and the IDF implements what he does. And I think Hagari is genuinely talking about implementing exactly whatever the politicians do, as is his job. And I think he's doing that with some honor, to be honest. But I think he has to be realistic as well, and he has to feed back that kind of information to Netanyahu. And perhaps sometimes the best way to do that is slightly in the public realm, or at least to push a little bit more and to make people think a bit more, because I think those words are also directed at the public in Israel, and having unrealistic expectations as to how quickly and suddenly this could be finished and over, and the war could be declared won, and Hamas defeated. That is not going to stand if the ideology is not also tackled, and it's not clear yet that message has fully sunken in. When you've got people like the son of Netanyahu, Yair, he's criticizing the IDF for October the 7th, for the fact that it occurred in the first place. And then you've also got the fact that has Netanyahu properly himself taken responsibility for what happened on October the 7th. Those kind of things are, they're potentially a little bit gossipy and not really the point, to be honest. The point here is everybody would like to see the total end of Hamas permanently, not just for today. So if it's not permanent, it doesn't count. So both are aiming towards the same goal. And I think Hagari is simply laying out the only means of getting there and what he needs in order to be able to implement that.
It might well look like he's spoken out of terms, but bear in mind he's a military guy. He's just seen over 300 young people dying because you're trying to minimize the losses of the Palestinians on the ground. When you had to put boots into Gaza to make sure you don't kill too many civilians because the world doesn't agree with Israel. So Israel has played that kind of game, and that was set by the politicians. If you were just for the military, they would just flatten the place. They went into it, but they were forced to take these losses. And Hagari here is saying, well, don't make effectively don't make this death useless and pointless. If we get into a situation where yes, we defied, we decimated Hamas, they are no longer able to do much with it, with their capability, but they're still there. So I think it's helpful for somebody who's in the military, who's got the kind of rational and practical basis and background and knowledge to flag up, guys, if we don't set something up, we're going to make another mess like Iraq or Afghanistan. So yeah, it might sounds not ordinary debate, this one going on, but these are extraordinary times. You cannot just play for the same rules.
And some of the other things that Hagari has said is equally practical and true, isn't it? He's pointed out that you cannot rescue hostages with military action in the way that they rescued Noah and the other 3 hostages, the weekend before last. That those are exceptional circumstances, and they're extremely difficult circumstances, and there's no way that is going to be the route out of this. Now, doesn't mean capitulation to Hamas. It still means defeating Hamas. But of course, it's necessary to make it clear what's realistic, and it's very easy for I think for politicians in any country, particularly in a difficult time of war, to point at their army members and expect them to magic up solutions that are simply impossible on the ground. So I have some confidence that the two are working together towards the same goal, and that this isn't a rift between them so much as identifying what's really true in the world and working out how best to implement it, even if that has involved, some public words which aren't normally how these things will be done.
Who's not cooperating with the two of them definitely is the international community and the UN. We're going to talk after the Daily Objective in the reality show. We're going to talk about how the UN is not helping at all. In fact, it's helping the other side, but by constantly trying and make Israel's life impossible and trying to bolster the propaganda war from the side of Hamas. So unless there's anything else you want to cover?
I just wanted to mention that I think that there's a fear that Israel is going to be called an occupying force. I mean, it's already called an occupying force, but there's a fear it's going to be called an occupying force after the war is over as well. Even more so when Israel is overseeing, how aid is distributed, how things are rebuilt, and obviously whichever body is set up in order to oversee the reconstruction of society within Gaza. But of course, if you hand it over to some Arab coalition or to some, God forbid, UN entity who is an enemy, then you are handing over the keys to the enemy, because they're only going to declare Israel an occupying force anyway, even in that circumstance. And then they're going to also declare that anything that isn't working as it should is Israel's fault, and there's Israel holding it back. And of course, all of this removes the responsibility and the agency from the people of Gaza to change themselves. And this is the crucial aspect of it. It can't be herded around by new leadership there has to be change from within, and that change from within only comes from recognizing that the ideology you've subscribed to that led to October the 7th has failed, and therefore, for that reason, you have to abandon it, and you have to recognize that it's never going to work. And if you actually want your children, your society to thrive, that it's impossible to adhere to such a death cult and expect a happy life at any stage. I mean, that's the key element here. So with that, I think we ought to mention that the Briefly Objective is our other channel. And if you look down below, you can see where it says for shorter material, have a look there. And you can also find an edited version of that Tal Safani piece I spoke about earlier, and the Ladder of Freedom, because that really does, in a nutshell, lay out what should happen after the war's end. So please join us in a few moments' time for the reality show. We'll be back here for that. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Bye. Bye.